recording. I you will if you don't mind, please hold your questions until the end. And you can raise a virtual hand by using the reacts button of your Zoom down in the toolbar. The presentation today is being closed captioned, and Debbie is providing ASL for Marsha and any participants who might require the service as well. So thank you very much, Debbie. Um, what else? I think it's also closed captioning. If you need to turn on the captioning, just again go down to the bottom of Zoom. There is a CC button or a show captions button. You just click that to turn that service on, and it will be turned on for you. If you do have any questions and chat is acting up in Zoom, you can email me directly. I'll be monitoring that as well. I think that's all I have. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Amy Brandt from the Office of Indigenous Initiatives here at Queens. So enjoy, everyone. Amy, take it away.
Now, Andrew. My name is Amy. I'm the Indigenous Training Lead for the Office of Indigenous Initiatives here at Queens. It's my great pleasure to introduce to you Marsha Ireland today. She's from the Oneida Nation, Turtle Clan of that nation, and she is a deaf wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Her husband, Max Ireland, is a hearing member of the Bear Clan, and they have 5 Oneida deaf children and 14 grandchildren, including 2 great-granddaughters. She works to revitalize Oneida Sign Language and has been invited often to speak and engage with First Nations, providing presentations and education regarding First Nations deaf people's lived experiences and the work with Oneida Sign Language. She's also provided the Thanksgiving address in Oneida Sign Language and considers herself an advocate and an educator. In this presentation today, Marsha's talk today will include her experiences as a First Nations deaf woman, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother. Now, go on, Marsha, and I will turn it over to you.
Nyonko. Andrew and Amy, as well as the team that supports you. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak today. Sorry, there's several Amy's here today. So my English name is Marsha Ireland. Well, Elijah is my maiden name. I went to the Ontario School for the Deaf. I started there in 1964. Just going to give you a brief kind of history of what sign language meant for us back in those days. In 1964, signing was not allowed. They used the oral method, so trying to teach deaf children how to speak. And for me, as an Oneida girl, sorry, I'm getting tripped up on my words here. I am a residential school survivor, even though I didn't attend a school that is known as a residential school. My school was the School for the Deaf. However, there are many similarities in the abuses and the treatment received. So I experienced that just based on my skin color being different than the majority of the kids who are in my class. But I'll come back to the sign language. So initially it was the oral method where they tried to teach us how to speak. And then they did finger spelling. So if you could comprehend that, everything was finger spelled. So if you were to say, hello, how are you? It would be HELLO HOWAREYOU question mark. And then they moved into assigned exact English approach, which is literally following the English grammatical markers and ignoring that of the natural sign language. I stayed in that school through till high school, and started there at the age of 4. And I must tell you that every week I went there during the week and stayed and came home on the weekends. I would have to go back to school on Sundays, and every Sunday I would cry and cry and cry and cry and cry and cry. I did not want to go back to school and be apart from my family and endure the abuses that I did. Eventually, school they did establish a school for the deaf in London, which was allowed me to be a day student, which was better. However, the structure of the school was the same, and therefore the abuses. And so as a young child, I never felt connected, nor did I understand really what was like. I just felt very disconnected. I didn't feel that I aligned or understood the cultural norms that they were trying to teach me. And at the same time, really struggled with where my identity was as a First Nations little girl, as a deaf person, and attending a majority all white deaf school. I stayed at school till 1978. I left there because I got pregnant. And I've always, I will say, I've always been an outgoing person. I've always engaged with people who are hearing or deaf or whatever walk of life. My husband and I connected because he learned how to fingerspell. So that's, and he understood that I use my hands to communicate. And like I said, in those early years, I really felt lost. I didn't feel like I was connected to my culture, to who I was, and what did it all mean. So I turned to drinking. As mentioned earlier, I do have 5 children. All of them are deaf. For my first 3 children, I was an alcoholic. I wasn't the greatest mom. I hadn't learned all of the trauma and what that left me with. And so, and just to expand on that a little bit, is to really sit for a moment and understand that as a First Nations woman, you are oppressed in 2 manners, one for being First Nations and one for being a woman. But I also experience a different oppression, which that is because I'm deaf. And not only do I experience this oppression from the greater population, but I also experienced it within my community because I was deaf, because they didn't understand that I needed to use a sign language to communicate. And written English is very, is a tool that can be used, but it's very difficult to utilize a language that for you is really considered a 3rd or 4th language. And then when you are needing to express emotions, things get more complicated. It becomes more and more challenging. And then the emotions increase. Quite often, I have experienced that people who have hearing feel or behave in a way that they are superior to deaf people. And as we know, or as people are starting to learn, is that this superiority has also been on those who are First Nations, which has really pushed me down. Of my grandchildren, we have 4 that are hearing. The other 9 are deaf. And one of them is has always been apt for languages and has 4 languages, can speak English and therefore American Sign Language. She also speaks Oneida and Oneida Sign Language. So she's the first in our family to have access to all 4 languages, which has been thrilling for us. I've always been an advocate. I've always been strong and outgoing. I've always advocated for my children who are also deaf. I think it's, as First Nations people, one of our strong traditions is our oral history and how that is shared with our elders and our knowledge keepers and given to the youth of of the next generations. But for those of us who are deaf First Nations, there's a gap, right? Where are there deaf knowledge keepers, deaf elders who are able to provide this same oral tradition in using sign language? I've always, as mentioned earlier, been quite active. I've been involved in a variety of different rallies. I went to Standing Rock, which was incredibly inspiring to see all of these people coming together for this cause. And at the same time, you can see the army with rifles standing, towering over other people, and Indigenous people coming together and praying and smudging. And it's such a beautiful thing. And then you look up and you see this army standing there, using their privilege of the height over top of all of us. One of my lifelong dreams has always been to go to the Grand Canyon. And so my husband and I, we went, my family and I went to the Grand Canyon, and there I was able to stand and look down, and it was so empowering. And it brought me back to that moment in Standing Rock, where I was there looking up and felt very intimidated. In the Grand Canyon, it was like roles reversed. Finally, I am looking down, that no more will anybody look down on me. Incredibly powerful moment in my life. Kind of jumping all over the place here. I really am speaking from the heart. So in 2016, the revitalization of Oneida Sign Language began. And that was really thanks to an elder, Olive Elm, who, as in the past, for many, many years, I advocated within my nation. I advocated and constantly brought forth that we needed to have an interpreter to come to Oneida to interpret. And finally, that occurred. However, when people would speak in Oneida, the interpreter would put her hands down. And so Olive was quite intrigued as to why this was happening. And it was quite simply because the interpreter wasn't fluent in Oneida, never mind Oneida Sign Language. And so that Olive was able to recognize that and really engaged with me in working together to revitalize Oneida Sign Language. And this is, like that moment at the Grand Canyon, this is one of those moments in my life where I started to understand. I started to feel connected. prior to this time, like I'd participated in sweat, but when I had done that tradition, I just felt kind of blinded and couldn't really see. This moment in my journey is where I felt like, oh, I could be a part of the sweat, and I could see my spirits coming to me. And an elder and a knowledge keeper had seen like the difference in me during that sweat. And what, when we were speaking about it, and they were talking about like how in that moment, how I was connected. And again, this is a life-changing moment for me. This is where my spirit name, Tehum Dagwegum Dayan, which is loosely translated is woman who signs. And this is where things for me start to connect, and I start to get a sense of identity. I can start to actually give thanks and have appreciation and understand on a deeper level how powerful we are as First Nations women. And through through these kind of what would seem like little things, but as they come together, they build you up. And as you get built up higher and higher, other people start to recognize that transition in you. I've been very fortunate to be invited internationally, where I was invited last year to France to speak about the revitalization of Oneida Sign Language and the experiences as a First Nation deaf person, to work in a team that's using not only Oneida Sign Language and English and Oneida, but also working within French and French Sign Language, French being the language of France. These are like inspiring moments that occur, and it's really because the stronger my sense of identity has become, the more people see that, and the more invitations I've had. One of the things that I also do is I work for the Assembly of First Nations, and I have been very strong throughout my life as an advocate for First Nations deaf people. And that one of the tools that we use to be able to participate in our traditions and our culture and our community is by the use of a sign language. And quite often, because we've been fighting for the basic needs such as shelter and water, accessibility has been lower on the priority list and hasn't really been at the forefront of people's minds. But for us as First Nations, it's incredibly important that I also have access. And this is a result of colonialization. And I think that, I talk a lot about, decolonizing ourselves, really looking at what does that look like for myself. And so for me, sometimes I get stuck in that system that this is the world that we live in, and I've grown up in, and I've experienced. One of the ways I decolonize myself is that I don't communicate via written language, because my language is a sign language. Even the term disability, for me, is a term that I do not resonate with. I don't connect with. Even the word deaf is difficult for me, simply because what it elicits from the majority population is pity. And I really don't understand why we have to have these labels. We all come from Creator with these exceptionalities. I always think, the human rights, that's what we should be advocating for, is just acknowledging that we are all human and we all come to the table and we all can work together. But unfortunately, that's not what happens. What happens is people stay in their little bubble, which is quite often those that have hearing, and they think about what works for them. So I envision that, in order for us to have that type of equality in this world, we need to really employ those who have lived experiences of that. So for me, it's having a person who is deaf to be a part of that workplace, to be a part of, that policy decision making, whatever entity it is. You really need to be inclusive so that you can start actually providing, so that you can actually talk or walk the talk and not just have it be talk. I'm going to focus, on deafness because that is my lived experience. I feel like when people make decisions, if there isn't a deaf person in the room, then it allows, you don't have an understanding of my lived experience. The job opportunity that you're taking away from a person who is highly underemployed, or a group of people who are highly underemployed. And so this is part of what I say to chiefs. I think what we need to do as First Nations people is show our strength. We don't need to engage in the argument, but we need to be the leaders. This brings a point to me that, we were called Indian, but the Indian doesn't represent the peoples of these lands, right? Indian represents people who are from India. So I don't understand how such a grossly mistake can be. I do struggle with the people that are moving to Canada. I understand their plight and what's happening for them, but at the same time, because our lands are not, we don't have that equality here. We don't have that understanding of First Nations, and that we can come to the table together when we're inviting other countries to join us. Those countries come with their understanding of what it means to be First Nations, which again is another oppression that we experience. I advocate quite strongly for language. Whenever we're talking about language, quite often people think language is a spoken language and a written language, and that's that. And so a lot of the work that I do, the what I keep saying time and time again is that yes, a spoken language and perhaps a written component to it, but it is also a sign language. Throughout our time, we know that there has always been a signed language. And so this is, my truth. And I share my truth with all of you. I'm very, very fortunate that I have an interpreter, that we have a close bond, and that, we work together so that I know that my message is getting across to you. I know quite often people are kind of thrown back because I think that there's several things that occur. I think sometimes people are stuck in that systematic, what we've always had. So then, then the engagement has to come about decolonization and decolonizing our own thought process and looking at what does that mean for me? And I always bring it back to like I am Haudenosaunee. And that as a Haudenosaunee person, I follow the wampum belt. And that wampum belt really shows how we can, you can have we can exist together. We can go through this journey together, but one doesn't interfere with the other. And it's okay to engage and to be a part of, but having that respect for each other. My work most certainly is not done. I would love to have conversations with mayors, with prime ministers, with the leaders of all of the parties, the conservatives, the liberals, the NDP. I think that when we're talking about the accessibility for the deaf community, they should all have an interpreter with them. As I've advocated strongly to have the interpreter that you see today to be with me, to work with me so that I have access, so that there isn't a gap for me. And so our leadership, or who have been deemed our leadership, should really be demonstrating that. It's like back to what I was saying with the chiefs, that we need to demonstrate what equality is. And that is having it there before somebody asks for it, or saying, oh, there isn't a need, when you really don't know. Earlier, I opened up with my experiences at the deaf school. And I still advocate in the deaf school. I still work there, and I fight with, I advocate and ensure that our First Nations kids who are going to those schools, that they're getting access to language, but that they're also getting access to tradition and culture. Smudging, and we've all heard, I'm sure everyone here has heard the rhetoric, oh, we can't do a smudge because the smoke will set up the fire alarm. And there are ways around that. And by putting up that barrier is just showing that disrespect, is just showing that position of power. And why? When really we're talking about the medicines that heal. And I think that when we're in this mindset of just saying no or putting up a barrier, this allows for this unsettlement, this argument. And this isn't the future we want. This is not what we want for our future generations. We want our future generations to have a beautiful life. We want it to be different for them. But yet we're still stuck in this very negative space. We worry about money, and it seems the more money you have, the more stress you have, the worse your health is. We lose sight of having a good heart and a good mind. I worry, and have worried throughout my lifetime, throughout this journey, that my Oneida culture may be gone. And so I advocate highly within my community that it's important. It's important that we know our traditions and our culture and our foods. We have a lot of health problems, in particular as diabetes. And so looking at treating it in a way that is meaningful, and using our own medicines. We have that westernized treatment. You get dietitians and nurses and doctors, and and they look at you and they go, you have diabetes, almost like a punishment, almost like I did something wrong. Again, why are we not looking at this through a lens of supporting and encouraging and looking at traditional ways, traditional foods, traditional medicines as healers? Truth and Reconciliation has been a topic of discussion for the last 6 years since 2018. But I think we really need to push this along. I think in our First Nations, again, because we have been focused on housing and water, the basic necessities of life, accessibility has been put down on very low on the priority list. And we know that the cities and towns around us have access. They have more access than we do. They have more funding available to them. And I know that First Nations people can lift themselves up. We can be better. But we need those partnerships to let go of the greed, let go of this idea of me. I let go of this idea that I want to be wealthy. Instead, really coming together and supporting us, right? Like really thinking about every child matters. Every single child matters. It almost feels like, when all of this came to light a few years ago, with Ken Loops and these unmarked graves and what we've been saying for a long time, it feels like the world is heartless in a sense that this was allowed to occur and continue and perpetuate and perpetuate and perpetuate, almost like the world supported this behavior. And so we've gained some support, but really and truly, there hasn't been enough of a shift for people to really understand. It's in the media more, people can see it more, but like just to highlight the murdered and missing Indigenous women, children, girls in Two-Spirit, it's heartbreaking. I worry for our next generations. I worry who will be left. Will the colonizers, will they actually succeed in eradicating us? And for me, these people are very guilty in their behavior. And I think that there needs to be more done to reconcile that behavior and to come to the table there. Sorry, what's come to mind for me is that when the Pope came to apologize, I was invited to be a part of that. And I was very curious to see, what the Pope was going to say. I was invited to be a deaf interpreter, at First Nations deaf interpreter there. And the Pope, it was only the Spanish, like the Pope and his Spanish speaking interpreter. And we, as the First Nations deaf people who would normally, because accessibility requires us to be at the front so we can see the interpretation, we were pushed to the back. And the whole world was like, oh my gosh, the Pope came and gave an apology. But did he? Did he apologize? He pushed us off to the side. This journey of mine has led me down many paths, many roads, many experiences. Sometimes it's difficult to see the change. I'm grateful that I am as stubborn as I am so that I continue to advocate. I continue to say this message. Some call me stubborn. I do see the time. I want to allow to make sure that there's space for others to ask questions. So maybe I'll end it there, maybe a bit abruptly, but I'll end it there.
Great. Thank you, Marsha. Thank you, Debbie. Everyone, it's Andrew Ashby again. I'm just going to pause the recording.